The dreams last night were worse than usual. There was no slow growth like I'd witnessed before, and he wasn't like the others. Jasper was strumming in the living room, the blood and brains leaking from the hole in his head. It really ruined the effect of it all. Jasper in the living room with his guitar, Jasper sitting on the stairs with a wood harp, Jasper on the drums in the corner, Jasper fiddling with the tuner as he worked with his bass. Drip, 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 drip. It was heavily disconcerting, but at least I didn't have to get surprised by him with a short trip up to his room. I was upstairs moving through the house as I followed his ghost when I heard someone yelling from the house below. It wasn't a voice I'd ever heard before. This one was deeper, harsher, a cop voice. He was shouting, really losing it, and I came to the railing that overlooked the living room and looked down into what must have been a heated discussion. "I know you two have something to do with it. Fess up. Why'd you kill him? Why Jasper? You've always gotten along the best with Jasper. We all knew that. So why kill him?" Silence. Nothing but silence. And the creak of old wood. "You better talk to me, or so help me God, I'll..." "Leave her alone," said a very familiar voice. It should be familiar. It was the voice that had read all the stories when they played inside my head. She said she didn't do it, so she didn't do it. We all knew that Venus was a drunk, and Jasper had always said he'd rather die than lose his hearing. What about Marguerite, huh? What, are you saying that she made herself bleed out of every orifice? That's not something that just happens. If it's not her, then it's you, and I know you aren't smart enough to pull this off by yourself. They argued loudly, their words running together as they yelled, but Persephone stayed silent. "They kept yelling for most of the night," said a voice to my left. I turned to see Jasper, his head still leaking as he leaned against the banister. "Jasper," I whispered. "They yelled all night, but by then it was too late for any of them. Carter had already decided that he'd kill the rest of them. It was only a matter of time." He looked at me, one eye dark where the bullet had gone through it, and I tried not to look at the wound. "If you want the rest of the story, you'd better go to Persephone's room next. You'll know you're there when you smell the potting soil." I shook awake then, still hearing that dripping as the sun hit my eyes. I was hungry today for a change, and decided to make a big breakfast, like I'd had when I started on the upstairs. Eggs, toast, bacon, sausage, biscuits. I made myself a meal that would have satisfied a crew of working men. I couldn't remember if I'd eaten in the last few days, nothing beyond the toast and peanut butter I'd had for breakfast, and I felt much better once I had a belly full of food. I had already decided I was going to check out Persephone's room today. Well, that's not true. Before the dream, I had been prepared to go to John Jr.'s room, assuming he would be the next target. But after the dream, I supposed I would have to see what role she had played in all of this. I let my overalls have the day off. They were getting a little gross. I put on some flannel and some work jeans as I climbed the stairs to get ready for today's investigation. At this point, the house renovations seemed secondary. This had gone from an HGTV show to an episode of Cold Case Files pretty quick. I went to the last room on the left, the layout seeming to put the kids in descending order in each hall, and opened the door to the wet smell of dead plants. There were planters in the window, hanging pots from the ceiling, and somehow they had put glass in where the roof should be. It meant the room, unlike the others, had a lot of natural light coming in, and I imagined that at night you could lay in bed and look up at the stars. The floor was carpet here too, but not the thick stuff that had been in Marguerite's room. The carpet here was short, springy, and I thought for a second that it might be grass. They had given Venus a mirror floor and found wood that would be acoustically sound for Jasper, so a room with grass didn't seem too far out there. It turned out to be simulated turf, though, and so I began to search. There wasn't much to search, as it turned out. Persephone had lived a pretty Spartan lifestyle. Plants had clearly been her life, and the potting soil I found in the closet attested to that. The paper on the wall was the same as the paper in the other rooms, but after pulling some of it down, I could see that there was nothing behind it. The room had a bed, but it was made up like something in a prison show or a military barracks. There were some books on the shelves, but they looked unopened, if not dusty. The clothes in the closet still had tags on them. Nice tops and trendy skirts, inches from a trough of dirt. I soon began to think that this might not be the room I was looking for. The other rooms had looked like sanctuaries, places where the owners would be at ease and relax. This room didn't feel like that. This room was more like the apartment of a workaholic. It held the things she needed to have, the things that she required, but it wasn't her place. If I was going to learn more, I needed to find Persephone's sanctuary. I checked downstairs, the library, the studies, but none of them felt like where I was supposed to be either. I went to the garden, but it was just beds of soil and the remains of that last fire. If this had been her place, then Carter had burned it down, and there was no story here. I was getting frustrated. Carter clearly wanted the story told as much as his siblings did, so why would they send me on a wild goose chase? That's when I saw it, sitting beneath the trees that would soon take back the garden if they weren't taken care of. It looked like a little guest house, but the green paint and the flowers growing outside it let me know that it was the place I'd been looking for. The door slid open sideways, and inside was what I'd been trying to find. The walls were covered in bookshelves, old weather-beaten tomes on plants and natural sciences. Some of them looked like they'd been written a couple of centuries ago, but I saw a few that looked more modern, unsurprised to see Persephone Harrave on the spine of them. She'd written texts as well, it seems. And some of them were spread across the work tables, too. The work tables were nothing but planter boxes and rotten equipment. Most of the boxes had become overrun, the plants growing onto the table as they slowly overtook the space. There were mushrooms, flowering plants, hardy-looking mountain roots, and all of them growing here together somehow. The bed in the corner, little more than an army cot with a comforter thrown over it, looked well used, and I realized this place was where Persephone had gone to get away from stress. This was her sanctuary, but I feared it was likely her tomb as well. The tables broke apart angrily as I tipped the shelves over. I knew what I was here for, and it wasn't a lesson in plant life. The words were there, glowing slightly so I could make them out in the dark space. They wound around the walls, just as they always did, and I saw no way that he could have gotten a ladder in here. The place was packed with barely any room to stand, even before I'd toppled the shelves, and I had to guess that he had simply stood and wrote all of this. This must have taken days, weeks even, and the effort to hide them had taken even longer, I was sure. This was unlike anything I could imagine, and as the story spooled out before me, I filled my nose with the smell of soil. Persephone Harrave, youngest of the Harrave daughters, was born with a green thumb. I do not mean that she began gardening early. I do not mean that she took to the natural world like a fish to water. She did these things, but it is not my purpose for telling you that she was born with a green thumb. I mean, upon birth, her thumb was green. It was from no disease or mortification. It pained her not at all, even years later, but her thumb was always green. It was the light green of a lime, almost yellow, and the tint stopped at the base and went no further. Our parents took it as a sign and named her Persephone, just as they had done with Venus. Whether by naming convention or by talent, Persephone took to nature like a duck to water. She hated being indoors, much preferring to live outside than in a stuffy house. From the years of 7 to 11, Persephone refused to sleep inside. Our parents tried to entice her to stay in the house, through grass carpet, natural light, and accents in the decor, but she refused to sleep indoors. She kept plants in there instead, and when she was 13, they got her the little house you see here. Until then, she slept in a tent in the garden, or sometimes on a blanket under the stars. Persephone was a talented scientist from the time she was young. She had learned to read almost before she could walk, and she devoured anything about plants and growing things. She took over the garden in the back, causing quite a stir when she yanked up Mother's lilies, but the flowers she grew to replace them were far superior. She seemed to know the perfect way to cross-pollinate, to make new kinds of plants and flowers, and she was soon growing things that no one had ever seen. We didn't know how, no one understood what she was talking about most of the time, but Persephone was doing things that would progress the natural sciences by leaps and bounds. Unfortunately, it appeared that her acumen for science did not translate into anything like social grace. Persephone never made any friends outside the family. People found her strange, and that made them standoffish. She was always in her lab, skipping school and forgetting friendship to work long hours on different breakthroughs. We were sometimes the exception to this rule, and I can remember drinking in the garden with her and Venus and Jasper. John Jr. and Marguerite never really had time for us, and we usually found ourselves grouped together in the garden, sharing a bottle. Persephone was better when she was a little drunk, but it wasn't a state she indulged in often. When the others left, it became just the four of us. Mother, Father, Persephone, and I. Persephone did not often leave, not at first, but as her research became more respected, she spent more time away from the house. She came back more often than anyone else, and I think our relationship was the most stable of any of the other siblings. The two of us were the closest I would call to friends. I still couldn't understand half of what she was talking about, and she struggled to understand the literary arts, but we often shared space together, and I liked Persephone. Soon we became three, and then just the two of us. We were already here when the others arrived, and I assumed that she would just stay here after they left. She had her research, I had my novel, and I had gotten very used to having someone around. So when she said she was leaving for a long trip to the Amazon after Father's death, I was shocked. She couldn't stay, she said. She needed to do this. I was living here anyway. Why couldn't I just stay? She knew that was unfair. I had just signed a book deal. I needed to go on a tour as well, and I needed to leave as much as she did. She was sorry, but she had to put her research first. She had already provided me with the tools I needed to kill the others, though she didn't know it. I had listened to her prattle on about this plant or that plant long enough to know which ones I would use. I also knew that John Jr. would suspect her when it came down to it. I think towards the end she suspected me, but our almost friendship kept her from thinking me capable of such a thing. In comparison, her death was merciful, almost kind. I backed her car up to the shed, blocking the door with it before stuffing the hose underneath. I filled her little shed with smog, killing her in her sleep as she dreamed of an adventure in South America. I didn't like taking that from her, but the patron was very clear on what must be done. After her, that would leave only John Jr. I finished transcribing, unsurprised when I stepped out into the afternoon. I looked up at the house and was even less surprised to see a light on in the room I knew to belong to John Jr. I won't be sleeping tonight. I'm going up there to get my answers. This house has played enough games with me for a lifetime. You're still here. Thanks so much for joining us for tonight's spooky tale. If you'd like a little bit more spooky in your life, why not click on one of the videos that appears at the end of our story, or maybe head on over to one of our playlists where you can get your fill of spooky content. If you like your spooky a little more tactile, I've got a new book that's come out. If you'd like your own copy, there's a link below in the description where you can get your own copy of my spooky book. If you like what you see here on the channel and think you might like to support in a more monetized way, then why not come over to Patreon or become a member on YouTube? Speaking of, let's go ahead and thank our members now. Thanks to Civ Garstad, Unicorn Hollow, and Army Dude for being our Spooky Ghost contributors. Thanks to Janet, Lee Kendall, Saikat, Ronda J, Sue Casper, and Valinator for being our Spooky Skeleton contributors. And thanks to Oh Snap, Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Stephanie Carrington, Tyler Parker, Cinnamon Fox, Grim Reaper, TomBoiTopUwU, and Queen Sheebah for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. And a big thanks to Scott Donahue for being our Ghostly Writer tier contributor. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you'd like to support the channel, then come on down to Patreon or become a member on YouTube. Spooky Skeleton tier contributors, that's our $5 tier, get their spooky 12 hours early at 8:30 a.m. as opposed to 8:30 p.m. My time, of course. And while Ghostly Reading is only a tier that's available on Patreon, you get a signed copy of my book anytime I write one on your doorstep in, hopefully, a timely manner. If you'd like a book, we have many on Amazon. I've got links below if you'd like to follow those. Should get you to my page so you can buy any one of my 8 books, I believe we're up to now. I'm sure they'd look really nice on your shelf, and I'll sign them for you if you can find me out in the wild. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.